Hello, folks. It's Michael with the Reason RX podcast. Everything about education. Hope you're doing well and making it in these COVID times. At least people who are listening now. If you're listening in the future, it'll be different. But yeah, so December 7th, 2020, COVID quarantine. At least right now. For y'all in the future, it won't be. But today, we're going to talk a little bit about humor. What the hell does that have to do with education? Well, clearly, making some classes more interesting. Sometimes some kids complain a class is dry, they think something's boring, and sometimes a teacher has to do something that might seem dry to some students to do a derivation, work something out. And so some humor could help spice it up, help people stay more alert and awake and interested. And sometimes, you hear the 15-minute thing, work 15 minutes, take a break. Some classes could be structured like that, so you could throw in some jokes. It can help with the teaching. And when you learn some about humor, what it really is, getting into what causes it, classifying it, kind of getting maybe in the art and science behind it, we're starting to get into things we can learn about thinking skills and science. Like maybe if we get a science of humor, we look at what causes it. If we look at how we get classifications and categories of humor, we got to get examples to get the concepts for each thing. Many things we can learn about thinking from humor. It's something that maybe teachers could use to practice with their kids. Like if they're at a certain level, okay, make up a joke using this concept in physics or chemistry or whatever. There's plenty of it. Chris, maybe there's a joke went around 30, 40 years ago. Maybe we were alive back then, maybe we weren't. I'm just saying, it was 30, 40 years ago, so maybe we were alive then. Maybe that's how old we are.
I was basically comatose the whole time.
I can neither confirm nor deny. But, a simple joke about math, physics, engineering. So, I'm not, now this isn't I didn't mean to do this because we're talking about humor. It just seemed to be part of the situation about making up a joke in the context. But, so there's a conference in town. So there's 3 people staying in the same hotel. And they're on different floors. It's a mathematician, a physicist, and an engineer. And so, just by some strange coincidence, there's a fire on every floor where these 3 people are, near their rooms. Just a coincidence, man. Amazing. But the physicist wakes up. He sees that there's a fire in his trash can. So he goes over there, he calculates on paper, grabs some paper, puts on his glasses, turns on a light, calculates really quickly the exact angle he needs to throw a glass of water to put the fire out, calculates it, get how much water, throws it, got the thermodynamics down, puts the fire out, goes back to bed. The mathematician wakes up and he smells that there's a fire. There's smoke. He gets up. He goes to try to put it out. He goes and he's gets his paper. He's doing his calculations. He says, he finds that a solution exists and he goes back to bed. And then the engineer wakes up, smells that there's a fire, gets a glass of water, dumps it in the trash can, goes back to bed. But, yeah, so there's the difference. Physicist gets all technical, gets a glass of water or whatever, maybe the engineer gets the fire extinguisher or the glass of water. Mathematician, a solution exists. That's all I got to prove. But,
yes.
Do you remember that one back in the day? Or you forgot that?
Yeah, no, I knew that joke. So yeah.
Yeah,
the mathematician is the punchline. You have to put the engineer
I was thinking when I was saying that, I think I got switched out. Yeah, but that was running through my head as I was saying it. But so something like that.
Well, that's a case where the subject matter is the stereotypes of these professions.
Yeah.
And so if you're familiar with that, but that's just one small example of humor, because humor is way, way bigger than a lot of people realize.
Yeah, and so there's a lot we can get out of it. So first, before we get on, could you introduce yourself to folks, please?
Sure. My name is Chris Land, and I have written a book. It's called Why Funny is Funny, and it will be due out here next year. COVID was a little bit of a thing, but it's ready to go. It's going to be published with a companion book. The companion book is called How to Make a Funnier You. So it's a collection of tips and techniques for going about making yourself personally to be a funnier person. And of course, it dovetails very strongly with the theory that is presented in Why Funny is Funny.
Do you need the theory to get the other book?
Yes.
To make sense of it?
Okay. Otherwise, you'll be quite confused. Which, maybe that's what you like. So, okay. Just go right ahead. No, what I've created is something called clash theory, and that's the name for my particular theory, which goes and explains all humor, what all humor has in common, and how it varies in all of its different forms, why it is that people have different reactions to humor, both in terms of finding stuff funny, not finding it funny, and then also degrees. To what extent do you find it funny? Mm-hmm. So all of this stuff I go into at length. We're really not going to be able to have time in this conversation to go over all but the most barest pieces of it.
Hopefully we can talk more about it in the future. But
yeah, there's a lot to it. So I guess I want to warn people ahead of time. But it's fun. It's humor theory. Mm-hmm. I like it, at least.
How many pages is the first book, and how many is the second?
Let's see. It's like 85,000 words. So depending on how you print it, that's 400 pages or so. But it's probably split 3/4, 1/4, maybe 2/3, 1/3. Okay. So the theory is the big part of it, and then the practice of the second part is there as well.
So maybe 300 pages for the theory, or so 100 for the practice.
Yes, I mean I'll have to see what it actually comes out to in page count. But in general, for nonfiction, you're looking at 70 to 90,000 words, and I'm right at that. So. Okay.
Cool.
It's a standard length book.
And how long did it take you to really think about, research, develop your life, write the book?
The beginnings of it are 30 years old, because I first kind of pieced together, what's the essential component of humor, probably in the late 80s. And over the years I've refined it, and it was about 2012, 2013 that I said, okay, I shouldn't just be thinking about this and writing notes here and there. I should develop this into a book. And so I started the actual writing of it 2014, and then the writing of it was finished probably 2018. And I've been doing a lot of things after that, editing and preparation for publication.
Cool. And how does your theory differ than some others?
Well, the thing is, I actually developed the theory completely on my own. So I wasn't even really aware that there were other theories out there, because this was all pre-internet, And since then, of course, I've come to understand the basics of some other theories. And I definitely can see some differences in the way other theories treat this. I do think that there's a lot of compatibilities. Most of the kind of things that the other theories do, they're focusing on things in psychology or things in social interaction. And those are types of things that I don't really get to, because I really talk to what humor is, as opposed to how it is used socially. Mm-hmm. And so I think they're complementary in some respects.
But yours is more
I'm really in discussing all humor, and not subsets of it. And a lot of the things, like there's a theory, I believe it's from Aristotle, on superiority, like that humor expresses that you have some superiority over someone else, so ridicule and these kinds of things. And that definitely is a component of many examples of humor, but not all.
Right.
And so...
So your theory would be more fundamental,
yes,
to the others.
Yes,
kind of really at the root cause.
Yes, the root similarity that all humor has, but of course, humor has tremendous variety. And there's all sorts of different kinds of humor that are out there. And in fact, you'll notice that. I mean, every single example of humor is one that some people think is funny and some people think is not funny.
Mm-hmm.
Like every single example is like that. So
Yeah.
how is it that you can go and point and say, well, all humor is the same in this way? Well, it doesn't work for every example. So it's a lot more complex than it appears.
Mm-hmm.
Humor, there's an anticipation that humor is very simple, and like you have complex examples of humor, and then you have simple examples of humor. And the warning that I give is that even the simple examples are complex.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the number of different facets that they have, that each of which is capable of causing a difference in humor response among observers.
Mm-hmm. Anything else you'd like to say about your background or what makes you an expert on humor before we go on?
Well, the one real thing that does, I mean, I've been a humorist my whole life,
Mm-hmm.
but the one real thing that makes me an expert is that I have written this book.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
It is, because it's not just a book on humor. In a way, it's the book on humor, because I'm talking about all humor, all forms,
Mm-hmm.
including those forms of humor that have yet to be invented. They still have a part. This explains how it all works.
Interesting.
Now, that is a little bit of a, I mean, you shouldn't just believe me, because that as a claim that's like, wait a minute.
It might seem arrogant or something. Who are you to say?
Arrogant or just not right.
Yeah.
You know. But you can make up your own mind if you read it and see what you think of how I've dealt with it. Because, this is a book I wish I would have read when I was a youngster.
Mm-hmm.
But I hadn't written it then, so I couldn't.
Yeah, I know how that goes. Yeah. Yeah. Did you look only or mainly at types of humor, like in our context, in our history, or did you look at Europe, Africa, China, Japan, different times in history? What'd you do for your examples?
Well, it definitely has lots and lots of examples.
Mm-hmm.
But the examples that I chose are kind of a cross-section of all humor, but they tend to be examples that are the cleanest. They're the ones that really illustrate the particular nuance that I'm trying to get at. And I do cover a lot of times, a lot of countries, this type of thing. Of course, I'm not immersed in all of the cultures around the world, so I can't really pick examples from everywhere. But I mean, if you see the book, you can see that when I'm speaking to humor, I'm not talking about my own sense of humor. I'm talking about everyone's sense of humor,
Mm-hmm.
and all of the ways that they're the same, all of the ways that they are different. And that's something that you see over and over across cultures, across time, across history.
Yeah.
Humor's been around for forever, at least since recorded history. And the kinds of jokes that they made in ancient Babylonia are ones that we would recognize today.
Mm-hmm.
Just subject matter is different. I mean, that's an old joke.
Yeah. And then there's evolutionary background to it too. I think some mammals, not all of them, of course, but some can find some things like humorous, for want of a better word.
Yeah, there may be some parallels in terms of the way animals think, especially your higher order ones. But I don't know. That's definitely not my area.
Yeah.
And of course, there is a tendency to want to personify what animals are doing and to say, but they're not humans; they're animals.
Yeah.
So just because there's a looks like the connection there doesn't mean that it's exactly identical.
Yeah, right. That's one thing. Like some people, instead of grasping that animals are conscious, they want to use the word mind, or instead of thinking something's going on, they're processing. Okay, let's call what they're doing thinking, and then what people are doing reasoning, or something like that. They want to say that to talk about a theory of mind instead of theory of consciousness, and they want to say that some animals can reason when they can't. There is obviously the evolutionary roots for us there. We didn't come out of nowhere.
There's counterparts.
Yeah, we're not ex nihilo, out of nothing. So a lot of this stuff, thought, consciousness, humor, there's some roots in there somewhere, but then our conceptual consciousness allows us to do some things kind of beyond that, take a novel perspective on some things. But
yeah,
that's getting complicated and everything.
Well, a general note on terminology. I mean, it is the case that people mean different things when they use the same words. And in fact, that's something that I deal with quite a lot in my book. because, I use the term sarcasm, but I mean something very specific when I say sarcasm. And now it's what I recommend, but other people use the term differently, and really that's okay as long as you define your terms.
What do you mean by sarcasm?
I'm not, when I introduce all sorts of definitions for all sorts of humor terms, but I'm not saying, okay, you have to think this way. This is what clash theory proposes. This is the way I think. This is the way I recommend you consider. But it's not, I'm not laying down the law here. I'm just kind of putting together a theory that explains all sorts of stuff. I mean, I've been around for a long time. I have yet to encounter an example of humor that my theory doesn't explain.
Cool.
And I've also been able to use my theory to, create humor very easily.
Cool.
It's predictive and it's productive. So.
How would you define sarcasm?
Sarcasm is visibly stating the opposite of what you believe.
How do most people think about it? You're saying?
I think there's a common thought that sarcasm must be cynical. But that is, I'm really looking forward to my root canal. Mm-hmm. So it's this positive statement, but the meaning is a negative one. Mm-hmm. So you're saying something and it's the opposite of what you really believe. Mm-hmm. But you're doing it in a way that's visible, right? You're not actually lying because you're not trying to deceive.
Right.
You're just making this opposite claim. So, with a lot of examples of humor, it is a cynical expression because it is a positive statement that actually has a negative meaning. Mm-hmm. But you can have the reverse of that as well, and that's what I call positive sarcasm. And so I think the connection between sarcasm and cynicism is a cultural one. So it's not something that's inherent in sarcasm itself. Mm-hmm. And now, just as an aside, so sarcasm is related to irony. And in fact, there's probably some overlap. One of the things I learned is that in Europe, the terms are actually reversed somewhat. So when people, what we call sarcasm in North America, they call irony. And it's just a terminology, and the deviation was maybe a couple decades ago where the meanings kind of floated apart. I don't know. It's just people do use terms in different ways, and especially with some of these humor terms that I think are fairly slippery. Right? It's irony. What exactly is that? It's sarcasm. It's people recognize it, but when it comes to actually naming a definition, okay, that's a much more difficult task.
Yeah. And in addition to some of the stuff I said earlier, do you got any other thoughts about how humor is relevant to education and teaching and learning?
Well, so, just as an observation, humor can make things very memorable. It can make things very clear. It can be entertaining and therefore interesting. Now, of course, there needs to be a harmony between the humor and the subject matter that you're getting across, because it is possible to have humor examples that deviate or detract from the purpose of what you're doing. And so that kind of disharmony is something to avoid. And I talk a lot about that kind of stuff in my book. How do you go about generating humor in the first place, and then also how do you make sure that it's consonant with what you're trying to do?
Yeah, cool.
But definitely humor is something that can make pedagogy a lot more useful, a lot more practical.
Cool, yeah, good point. Powerful. Like the mnemonic thing, good way of helping people remember stuff.
Sure, yes, that's right, because it's mildly humorous.
Yeah.
Every good boy does fine, right? And that's the things. And there's all sorts of mnemonics out there.
Or for memorizing the quadratic formula. I don't know who or when, but someone put the words to Pop Goes the Weasel.
Yes, that works. Yeah. When I was in high school, we did all of the helping verbs. Am, be, is, are, was, were, been. Am, be, is, are, was, were, been. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And now I know.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I learned it. We sang it in class, and then now I remember it forever, even though I may not want to.
Yeah. True. All right. So, where do you want to start in talking about humor in your book? What shall we cover today?
What I might say is, because I've got an entire theoretical structure to it, that really I can't. I mean, even just the basics is a lot to go through. One of the things I might start off with is just kind of I don't know what to say. I think there's a lot of common thought about humor that maybe isn't. It's not that it's inaccurate. It's just that what I have to say in clash theory is a little counterintuitive. And the reason it's counterintuitive is there's kind of these general assumptions about humor that are very widespread in the culture. Yes?
Oh, wait. One thing I was going to ask earlier that I forgot until just now. Could you, maybe for folks, differentiate some related concepts so we're clear about what we're discussing? Humor versus comedy versus comic or something?
Oh, right. Yeah, because you had said comedy.
Accidentally, yeah.
People use the term humor and comedy as if they're interchangeable. And to me, humor is much, much bigger than comedy. Comedy is humor as entertainment. So humor occurs in many cases where it's not intended as entertainment. And because of that, it's not comedy.
So comedy is more of a profession?
Yes. It's an entertainment. Humor as entertainment.
And then, I wouldn't call, and that's a good point, like with a 3-year-old, you can do stuff that's humorous, but I wouldn't call it comedy at all. Well, all kinds of stupid things you can do with a 3-year-old. What?
Well, any kind of social interaction that's just one-on-one, I really wouldn't call it comedy. Because at that point, it's just social interaction. Yeah. It's not professional entertainment. So I kind of reserve comedy for entertainment. And in particular, the professional kind, which is prepared. Right? People generally don't have a spontaneous expression of capital C comedy. That's something that they work on.
What about funny versus humor, or funny versus humorous?
I actually consider funny and humorous to be synonyms.
Okay.
They're exactly the same.
Okay.
Yeah, but you will notice, and I mentioned this earlier, you'll notice something that's funny is only funny to some people.
Some of the time.
Other people that are going to think it's not funny. That's the case with every...
I know there's things that I thought was funny at one time in life that aren't later.
Yes, there's changes. Well, I go into a lot of reasons why. So the two kind of assumptions, or the two kind of general points that I kind of want to start with is, first of all, humor is far more complex than is generally recognized. So you can take even a very simple joke, and the example, well, I use a lot of examples, but the joke from Airplane, can you fly this plane and land it? Surely you can't be serious. I am serious, and don't call me Shirley.
Right.
Okay, very simple joke on the surface, but there's actually a whole lot going on with this. And in fact, if you talk about the collection of observers, all of the different kinds of people who might see that joke, there's going to be differences in the way each of these observers respond to that joke in terms of whether or not they find it funny or not, and then to what degree do they find it funny. But the causes of all of these differences, there's a large number of them. And in fact, it's around 36 that I have identified in the book of individual kinds of causes for differences in humor response. So that's, and it's a simple joke, right? What's there to analyze? Well, let me tell you, there's a lot. And so I go into a lot of the explanations for this. And I think one of the reasons that's a little counterintuitive is for yourself, or you yourself observing humor, it's easy. You just detect it. Is there humor there? Okay, then it's funny. You don't have to analyze it or take it apart. You just observe. And so you're not really thinking about all of the different ways all of these other people are responding to humor and why they might see it different.
And you can't.
Because you don't need to.
Yeah, to some extent you can't.
Yeah.
Not on the spot. Yeah.
No, well, you don't need to. And in fact, there's a parallel that I make between, there's humor and humor theory, and it's a parallel to music and music theory. So music theory is definitely, people recognize that's a thing, but you don't need to know music theory to listen to it or to play it or to compose it even. You don't need to know about how, you just go by what sounds good. And for humor, that's very much the case. Even good people point. Who are professional humorists, I mean, they create humor as a career. They don't really go in and analyze it from a theoretical perspective. Yeah. Because they don't need to. They just kind of go, oh, yeah, that sounds funny. Okay. And if it's funny to them, then they can go with it. And so what I'm doing is really kind of breaking new ground because, at least in the common parlance, because humor theory is not really something that people are aware of. Because why? So I'm definitely breaking new ground in some respects here. Now, there have been other kinds of humor theories, but all right, mine is something that's quite different.
Mm-hmm. And what are some things? Go ahead. What?
Well, the second thing that I would say that's different, and maybe I should change it since we're in a conversation here. I can kind of do a little bit the Socratic method here. All right. So you're going to be who is Socrates' victims that he would question? Well, this is all in Plato's stuff. So, but okay, let me present it to you. All right. Let's suppose there's these disciplines out there, right? Psychology, linguistics, education, entertainment. To which discipline does humor belong? And I could list some others, anthropology, I could sociology, other kinds of disciplines.
I don't know. Better think about it.
Well, yeah, and it's because it's like, oh gosh, I mean, all of them have something to say about humor, and that's true. That's true because you go to a humor conference, and it's people from all of these different disciplines. Here's a neuroscientist, and they're talking about what happens inside the brain when people are detecting humor, and it's distinct. It's something distinct. So neuroscience definitely has something to say about humor. Mm-hmm. Maybe humor belongs to neuroscience. Well, my answer to this is that humor is its own discipline. There are things, and it's all the stuff I talk about in my book, that belong to humor only. Now, there is a lot of overlap. There are examples and cases of something that is both humor and psychology. It's both humor and sociology. It's humor and it's entertainment. It's humor and it's linguistics. Because there's many forms of linguistics that are humorous. Rhetoric. There are types of rhetoric that are humor. All right. And really, there hasn't been this thought in general culture that humor is something distinct. It's just kind of floating in between all of these, and different pieces of these disciplines talk to humor. So I'm carving a space out in the middle that is humor alone, and that's counterintuitive. So that's not something that I expect people to just go, oh yeah, okay, that's not a problem. All right, I like your dog.
Cat.
That was a joke.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Wondering how you meant that. Yeah. Kitty. Yeah. But yeah, he's big cat, little dog. Yeah.
Yes.
But cool. So, you got those 2 points. Could you repeat them again for folks? Summarize.
Yes. These are things that Clash Theory is promoting that seem counterintuitive, only because the general understanding of humor is, let's say, it's more primitive now than it will be in 20 years.
Yeah.
And these are, the humor is far more complex than is generally recognized, and that humor is its own discipline. Mm-hmm. Humor is something that is distinct from what humor is a part of. And actually, I didn't go into that aspect of it as much earlier. Okay, when you watch a movie, there's a soundtrack to the movie. Okay, and you may be aware of it, you may not be aware of it, but at least you understand that the soundtrack is something distinct. And if you took the soundtrack away, it would be a different experience. If you replaced the soundtrack with something different, it would be a different experience. Even though when you watch the movie, if you're like most people, like me, I'm not a composer. I don't really pay huge attention to what the soundtrack is doing. Now, if you're a musician, if you're a composer, you're definitely going to pay attention to this. It's something that you're more sensitive to and aware of. All right. For me, humor is something that is distinct. So you can have anything that humor is a part of. The humor is something distinct. It's like the soundtrack in that you can kind of think about it as something a bit separate. Mm-hmm. That is a little hard to do because oftentimes humor is so tightly wound up with the experience that you really can't even consider that the humor is something that's distinct.
Mm-hmm. Kind of
okay.
So holistic. It's kind of its own thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's because it's in a lot of cases it's extremely hard to like pull humor out, to pull it apart, because if you take the humor out, it changes the perspective of what you're experiencing very significantly, maybe even more significantly than removing the soundtrack changes a movie. So the example that I use for this is, if you go to Denny's, they have a menu, right? And it's a menu. It's just like anything. It says what you can order and the prices and what's in it. And one of the things that they have is moons over my hammy. And so it's a breakfast dish and it's got ham in it. Okay, well, this is a little bit of a pun, right? It's moons over Miami, except they changed it to my hammy. All right. This is not comedy, right? It's not like you're going to Denny's to be entertained by their menu.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit of humor and it's a little bit of fun. Okay. It's very easy to imagine that humor isn't there, right? You could just imagine that the breakfast name is some other name that isn't humorous. And so what? It's the same thing. It's a menu. You take the humor out, it's still a menu, right? But there's other kinds of things that the humor has a part of that it's very difficult to see what it is with the humor removed. And in particular, it's things like social interactions or anything where there's a deep personal investment where there's also humor. It's really kind of difficult to see that the humor is something distinct from that.
So what's your basic thing about humor? Is that there's a clash there? Do you want to get into that now or develop some other ideas first?
How much time do we have?
Maybe half an hour or so.
All right, well, let me show you a diagram. Okay, so I had this diagram to start with. And let's see. Yeah, see, this is too much. Too much.
Yeah.
You know what this is? Actually, this is from teaching also.
Yeah, I remember seeing that a long time ago.
This is a cheat sheet.
Yeah.
This is a cheat sheet. And what's in it? What's a cheat sheet? It's something that you refer to after you've already learned the material.
Right.
Right. So you took physics or whatever. You have this cheat sheet that's got all your equations on it. Right. And the idea is you're not using that cheat sheet to learn the equations. You're using it to refer to. So that's really what this thing is. But this is too much. Right. So this is kind of what I talk about in the book. And so this is fun if you've already read it. But if you haven't already read it, this is too much.
Yeah. So
I have a simpler version, which is this.
Nice.
So this is the one that's actually going to go into the book.
Oh, cool.
And so here, I guess I can kind of talk to it and
Remember,
try to not.
This is only audio, not video for folks.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, you're looking at it at least.
I get to see it.
Yeah,
people got to pay extra if they want to see it. Not
right.
good.
And this is superiority theory. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
True.
Well, what this does, this shows the three major components of clash theory, which is kernel, context, and culture. Mm-hmm. And kernel is the term I use for the thing that makes it humor. The thing in a humor event that makes it humor. And actually, that's a fairly small portion of what an observer is experiencing, is the kernel. But the kernel, of course, has a lot to, it kind of defines what the humor is. Then you go over to context, and context is everything that's in the humor event that is not part of the kernel. And I divide context into the humor context, which is all of those elements that influence the way humor is perceived. So either they enhance the perception of humor or they detract away from the perception of humor. And I have 6 different components of the humor context. And then the full context is the everything else. So it's all of the other things that really aren't part of the humor at all, like on Denny's menu. It's a menu, right? It's not, the rest of the menu isn't comedy. It isn't even humor. It's just communication of information.
Yeah, but then it's like everything that conditions the humor, because it wouldn't be the same if it weren't on a menu, but the rest of the menu isn't part of the kernel.
again, I'm speaking only from a perspective of humor. So what I'm doing is I'm recognizing that when humor's out there, it's a part of something that itself is not humorous.
Yeah.
Right. But under those circumstances, you still have influences on the way humor is perceived. And that's really lengthy to try to get into that. The last element of there is culture. And culture is the things that the observer brings to the observation. So it's not something that's necessarily present in the humor event itself, but it's cultural understandings. And of course, culture is a big part of many forms of humor. And then there's a particular subset of culture, which is humor culture, which is these are all the different preferences for how you express humor. So it's within the culture section that I talk to many of the kinds of familiar humor forms: parody, satire, wit, catchphrases, wordplay, ridicule, pranks. There's a bunch. There's some I don't even list on.
Can you give an example, maybe, or example or two, 1, 2, 3, and talk about what the kernel is in each one and the context?
I think at this point, what I can do is talk to what a kernel is.
Okay.
But really, all the rest of this is not really something I can do in a short amount of time because there's so many pieces to it.
Not enough time today.
No, but I can talk to the kernel. And the kernel is, it's actually very well camouflaged. It's something that is quite hidden. And to kind of start, and this is maybe like a little 5-minute brief discussion of what a humor kernel is. Because it's something I can answer the question, but then until you understand what the question is, it's hard to determine the answer. So, and the thing I start from is there's a humor theory called incongruity theory, and it says, all right, well, in humor there's something that's incongruous. And typically it's something that's unexpected, and that it is suddenly revealed. Okay, so, and this kind of makes sense. There's a lot of examples of humor where you're surprised, and there's some kind of nonsense, and then it's resolved somehow. And so the idea of sudden nonsense or unexpected incongruity is a useful clue.
Mm-hmm.
And all right, so I'm going to give an example here. Now, the trick is anything that explains what humor is has to be present in even the simplest examples. And so this is where you go. You go to the simple examples of humor and see what's there. Because if it's true across the board, it's got to be true for these really simple ones. And to do this, I need to kind of caution. So this is a children's joke. Okay. So this, you want to consider the perspective of a child. There are other kinds of more advanced humor perspectives like sarcasm or surreal or awkward or meta-humor or anti-humor. And these are definitely mechanisms by which people can sense things as being funny. But I'm not going for any of that with this. Okay, leave all of those really sophisticated conceptions aside, and we're only going to consider the perspective of a child.
How old?
In order to try and explain. So
3 years old, or what? How old would the child be?
Let's say 7 or 8
okay.
or 9. Right around the time where they start getting the idea that there's things that are funny. Mm-hmm. And of course, the things that are funny to children tend to be very simple. They tend to be very childish because the kids aren't to the point where they can understand things that are much more sophisticated, like sarcasm. I mean, sarcasm is a more advanced type of thing because you're saying something and it's like it's not really what you mean.
Yeah.
So it takes a while to process. All right. As I go through this example, now this is not going to be the funniest thing you've ever heard, right? That's not the idea. Mm-hmm. The idea is we're trying to get in a cleanest form what it is that's happening with humor. So we're looking for some kind of unexpected nonsense or something that's suddenly revealed. All right? Now, this comes in the form of a joke, and the joke is a question, and the punchline is the answer to the question. That's a very standard type of cultural expression of humor. So the question is, what is a ghost's favorite food? So, okay, this is clearly the form of a joke. I mean, it's the kind of things that, if you're a kid and you're reading a kid's book of humor, or your crazy uncle is telling you jokes, this is the kind of thing that you might say. So, what is a ghost's favorite food? And there's maybe a tinge of humor already because, okay, ghosts aren't known to have preferences among food types, but okay, that's really the aside. The humor in this really is centered in the punchline. And the punchline is, the ghost's favorite food is boo corn. So corn is a food, and boo is the sound that the ghost makes. So when you put them together, that is nonsense. There's no such thing as boo corn. Even to a kid, they know, okay, that's just made up. It's nonsense. It's not real, and it's unexpected. So it's sudden. It's suddenly revealed, unexpected nonsense. And this is all of the things that you need to make humor. But this isn't funny.
Yeah.
It's not funny. So how is it that something that meets all of the criteria for humor isn't humorous? All right, so let me try again. What is a ghost's favorite food? Blueberries. Blueberries is a ghost's favorite food.
True.
Now this is recognizable as humor. Now, it's not the funniest, but that's not the point.
Mm-hmm.
Boo berries is humor, and boo corn is not. So what's the difference? I mean, they appear to be exactly identical. What's the difference? And let me ask that to you in a Socratic manner.
Blueberry sounds like a fruit or berry that actually exists, whereas boo corn isn't anything.
Yes.
I want some blueberries. Blueberries. Mama, can I have some blueberries? Can I have some blueberries on my ice cream?
Yes. Yes. There is a thing called blueberries.
Yes.
What's the comparison? What's the similar thing for boo corn? There isn't one.
Unless someone knows about blue corn.
Well, actually, I did mention this to someone, and they said, "Oh, it's just a blue corn." And I was like, "All right." I've actually changed it in the book. I don't use blue corn.
How many people know about blue corn, though? We're calling it blue corn. So
it's very obscure. It is very obscure.
Yeah.
But you know how hard it is to find an example of humor that doesn't have these kinds of distracting interpretations? I mean, it's crazy. Every single example of humor is something that people want to riff on and say, this other funny thing. And it's, let me tell you, it was hard to kind of narrow this down to get something that doesn't have all of these distracting interpretations. All right. So the difference now is in this word blueberries.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know the word blueberries, if you have that familiarity, then you are detecting blueberries as humorous in a basic childish way. Whereas you don't have something like that for blue corn.
Yeah.
And so you have this experience of, well, okay, this sounds like it's a joke, but I don't get it. Mm-hmm. So this is now where we get to the clash theory identification. In order to have humor, it's insufficient to just have nonsense. You have to also have a sense. You have to have a corresponding sense element that pairs up with the nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's happening in the mind is not a comparison between these two, where you have this blueberries and it's like blueberries, and so you kind of put them side by side and go, oh, look at that difference. It isn't that. What is happening is, and I sometimes call this the cognitive superposition. Both of these things, the nonsense element and the sense element, are attempting to occupy the same cognitive space. And that doesn't work. That's like a divide by zero error for a computer. You're like, wait a minute, something's wrong here. There's some problem here, and then it gets kicked up to a higher level of consciousness, or metaphorically so. And at that point, it can be resolved and recognized as humor. So that's the definition that clash theory uses for humor. Humor is the clash between sense and nonsense.
And even with the boo corn, I think it could still work for certain people because of the context. They say that, and then a kid could expect you to say actually some words, and you say bucorn nonsense instead, and they might think it's funny. So, still the clash, as you say.
It's a real aspect of humor as well. So there's surreal is a type of humor as well, and so yes, you can detect almost anything as humorous if you're motivated and you have the right set of observing circumstances. It's
An
really
audience,
difficult to tease to the bottom of this. But this is what clash theory states. In every example of detected humor, the observer has a sense element and a nonsense element that are cognitively superimposed. They clash, and this clash is the sensation that is humor. That is the detection of humor. Detecting that clash is the same as detecting humor. And then, of course, this has all sorts of implications to all sorts of different phenomenon that are associated with humor that I go into throughout the rest of the book. And of course, if you know that this is how it works, well, now you can start to manipulate it so that, hey, now you can be funny.
Cool. Or
hope that was illuminating.
Yeah, definitely. And another example of something basic like that, just in terms of sense and nonsense. A friend, a long time ago, his kids were like 3 to 5, and they thought it was hilarious. They would just crack up laughing when they would say something just so silly as something like chicken butt fried in grease, 1 apiece.
Right.
It's the most funny thing to them. They just both start cracking up. They can say that over and over and over again, and it's still funny.
Yeah.
Just laugh at them laughing.
Well, when I was staying with my cousins one time, we had a contest amongst ourselves of our aunt, who was notorious for laughing at anything, to have the most ridiculously non-funny thing that you could say to her that would make her laugh. And the winner was, the cabbage is rotting in the sink.
Wow.
So I said that to her, and she started laughing. And it's like, okay, that's the winner.
Wow.
That's not funny. And yet, here she is laughing at it.
Huh. Wow.
But of course, you can go about saying things in a very funny way, and that's of course exactly what was done. So it was a cheat, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the cabbage is rotting in the sink. Yes, that's funny joke. Don't try telling that on stage, though. It's,
yeah. Not for the company. Wouldn't recommend it. Yeah. So,
yeah, you could, but
how'd you figure out this idea about the clash? What was your development or thinking?
It was actually
incongruity seems like fine. Like, why not just rest on your laurels with that? Like, what happened?
Well, I didn't actually hear the term incongruity until much, much later. Until I'd actually worked out the basics of clash theory. It was only much later that I even encountered what incongruity was. And of course, I do think there's some parallels because, okay, when people are developing humor theories, they're talking about humor. And so it's the same thing that I'm talking about. So there should be parallels.
Yeah.
But the incident that I think was most illuminating was, it was during college, and I wish I knew this person's name. It was an acquaintance. And it was, we were gathered together because we were going to go take an exam. And it so happened that Monty Python was on the TV. And we were just passing time because we needed to get everybody together, and then we were all going to leave. And so as we're sitting around, we're watching Monty Python. And this girl said, I don't get why it's funny. But the thing that impressed me most about her, and I'm really thankful, she wasn't condescending. She wasn't. It wasn't a dismissal. It was just, look, I recognize that other people think this is funny, and I don't think this is funny. Mm-hmm. But it was a matter of fact statement. She's like, I just don't get why people think this is funny.
And that's the first time you'd heard someone be curious about it? Like, how could someone's curious about why things are funny?
I knew that there were differences and distinctions. But to me, this was because my reaction was, well, how can you not think it's funny?
Yeah.
Right? I didn't see that as possible, that you could see it and think it was not funny. Mm-hmm. But clearly she did. And then I thought, okay, well, geez, what is happening in my own brain when I find something to be funny? I mean, what causes that experience for me? And of course, since I was a kid, my brain and I have had this adversarial relationship because it tries to do things and it doesn't tell me what it's doing. And I'm like, I want to know. You are telling me what you're doing. And it's always like, well, okay. I mean, and so, I have to pound my brain into submission to let me know what's going on because it likes to keep secrets from me. So finally, I made it give up the secret of what it was doing at the time that humor was detected. And so based on that, then, okay, that made things a little more clear. I recognized that there were two elements that were needed, the sense and the nonsense. And then, of course, okay, what constitutes sense and nonsense? There's actually lots of different types of things that can be seen as sense and nonsense. And in fact, that's actually how I break out kernel into all the different families. So there's the silly family, which is stuff that's very basic. And that includes, the atypical, the foolish, the surreal, the slapstick. That's all silly. Then there is the contrary family, and that is sarcasm and irony, and also sardonic humor fits in there as well. And then there is the improper family. And here, the sense and the nonsense elements are the mores and the manners of proper behavior. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's lots of different ways in which things can be. There's very simple ways. Fish out of water is a type of comedy where somebody comes into a culture, they weren't from that culture, and they're trying to navigate it. And it's funny because they don't know the rules. And then you have awkward. Awkward is a type of improper humor. And then, of course, you have the vulgar, that's a taboo. You shouldn't be saying that. And then there you are saying it. Mm-hmm. And it can be seen as funny if you see it in contrast to proper behavior, which you don't have to. You can just think, oh, geez, that's ugly, what you're saying. So there is a difference in how all of this plays out. But the kernel is the thing that all humor has in common. So every time somebody detects humor, there's a kernel. Every time someone does not detect the kernel or does not detect humor, then that means that a kernel didn't materialize. And there's lots of different reasons why that could happen.
So the kernel is basically the clash, the sense and the nonsense, and people can recognize it one side or the other, or may think it's not a clash that really matters, something like that. All kinds of ways they can not find it humorous.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you can be distracted. You can just not get it. There's maybe some piece of background information that you need. In some cases, there's a category of the humor context I call disposition, which is the hint, right? Here's a hint that something's funny is going on, and the hint because when you get the hint, now all of a sudden you're paying attention. All right, and paying attention means that you're able to detect humor more easily. Mm-hmm. So part of the job of a comedian, or really anybody who wants to communicate humor, is to give some kind of signal. You put your tongue in your cheek, or there's all sorts of different ways, verbal and nonverbal, that you can signal that humor is afoot. Mm-hmm. And then there's literary ways of doing it as well, so you can do that in writing. And I cover all of this in the book. So
cool. Get the book.
It goes on and on.
Yeah, when it comes out.
Yeah, it'll be out next year. So
cool.
It's been a slow process to get it out.
And so now it's making more sense why you call it a clash instead of a contrast.
Yeah. Yes.
Instead of contrast theory, clash theory.
It's difficult. I mean, this is not what I've written is not this easygoing. There is a lot of funny stuff in it. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is a funny read, but it's also serious too.
Yeah.
There's an underlying structure to it all because it's humor theory and it's the mechanics. So.
What you call it, like philosophy of humor or something?
Yeah, possibly. I guess I kind of see it as philosophical, but really humor theory. That's what it is. Mm-hmm. If you want to say that, well, humor theory is necessarily philosophic, well, okay, I'm not going to argue against that. And if you want to say, well, humor is not, okay. And it may be, for example, that humor ought to be considered as a sixth branch of philosophy. Okay. I mean, if people want to think that, that's not something I'm necessarily going to be pushing for because I don't know if that makes sense or not. Other people think it makes sense. I think that's reasonable, but it's also reasonable to see it as something distinct.
Yeah.
I definitely don't think that this is something that everybody is going to be just, that's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to take a while for people to think through these things, and it'll be interesting to see, especially in all of these different other areas where people are researching, the humor experience, because it has a lot of different kind of implications to all sorts of things, and it's interesting to see what people are doing in a practical sense.
Yeah, like in neuroscience.
Neuroscience is one, and
See the class coming up.
How is it that you go about, like, you record people meeting. They do these psychology experiments, right? So people are meeting, they're strangers. The pretense is that they're doing some other kind of activity, and they're just kind of getting together to be prepared to take this test or whatever. But it's really, they're just strangers meeting, and they're recording the interactions between them, and then the types of humor that develop sort of allegedly spontaneously. It's actually very choreographed, because people are very good at navigating new introductions, all of these kinds of social interactions. And now a lot of the stuff that people do, they're doing subconsciously, right? Mm-hmm. They're not actively going and thinking in theoretical terms about how they're interacting with other people. They're just interacting.
Yeah.
And you can see how humor materializes in these kinds of places. One of the things that I do, and this is probably a very common, actually, I don't even know if this is a term for it, but in legal world, there's something called a proffer, where, it's not an official offer, but if you did make an offer, this is what it would be, right?
That's funny.
Right? So, proffer is the term that they use. But I think there's something like that in social interaction, where you kind of make jokes, and they're jokes of a specific kind, and you're basically just kind of fishing for some kind of a response. But it can be a risky thing, because, many types of jokes aren't something that people share. So you're kind of throwing it out there just to see, and then if it works, well, then you're that much further along in your social activity.
They're kind of like profiling, tracking, finding out about a person,
right.
Experimenting.
But I think this is a very efficient way of finding that out.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, and one of the things I talk about to that is movie quotes. If you have a funny movie quote, you can say that, and if people recognize it, well, okay, now you're proto friends.
Yeah, it implies a lot of shared interest, shared culture.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thoughts.
And if it doesn't work, well, okay, you didn't waste that much time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Give another example of a kernel.
Well, one of the early chapters I talked to is kernel form, which is what's the substance of the kernel. So you can have humor kernels that are words, like blueberries versus blueberries. You can have them that aren't words at all. I mean, you can have facial expressions. You can have physical movements. You can have sounds. You can even have tastes that are the core of what humor is. And in all of these cases, it's something that people have to detect the sense and the nonsense. There's a composer, Haydn, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. He was Austrian.
Yeah.
And he wrote a number of musical compositions that were intended as humor. But okay, to get them, to get the joke, you really kind of have to know how classical music is put together. Now, if you do know how it's put together, and so you have this background knowledge and you have this expectation, then the way that he subverts it with his comic music productions can be very funny. And if you're not aware of it, you're just like, well, okay, that's just music,
Yeah.
And really, you're not detecting humor. But in that case, the form of the humor is sound. It's sound only.
How about this one? I think the kernel is in a particular word, but let me know. So I think I got this in maybe like a 4th grade or elementary school math book for jokes or something, or math book. But basic, simple thing. What did the acorn say when it grew up? You heard this one?
I believe I have, but I don't remember the punchline.
Okay. What did the acorn say when it grew up? Gee, I'm a tree. So Instead of geometry, like
Ah, yes,
squares, circles,
yeah.
proofs, G, I'm a tree, but slurred out G, I'm a tree. So the kernel would be in that geometry, that word, and then the rest of it would
Mhm.
be some context. Would that be right?
No, the kernel there is the phrase that the acorn says, gee, I'm a tree, and
Hmm.
then the word geometry.
Yeah, that's kind of like what I meant. So that would be the
Yes,
kernel. Yeah.
that's the
Um,
kernel. Now, the context is all of the introductions,
yeah.
where the acorn, and it has to be an acorn that says this type of thing.
Right.
Um,
Couldn't
and
be a
really, you
blueberry.
end up with a lot of strings.
What a what?
Yeah, well, you end up with sometimes your puns. That's a pun.
Hmm.
So it's a word or a phrase that has multiple meanings, and the multiple meanings are supported by context. That's kind of the distinction with pun. Um, you know, Waiter, my coffee tastes like mud. Well, you asked for fresh ground.
That's funny. Yeah.
Yeah. So in that case, fresh ground means two different things.
Right.
But okay, who makes coffee out of mud? Nobody. But so it's understood as soon as you start talking that this is a joke, right? There's going to be some funny thing that happens here
So to be sure,
because,
make sure people get it. Can you explain the two different meanings of?
well, and you have to say mud to start with because otherwise, when you say fresh ground, that's it. You
Yeah.
know, if you change the joke, and this is something that you can do that kind of illustrates
But fresh
what is happening.
ground, like fresh earth, fresh ground. Ground could
Right.
be stuff, or ground could be a process. Freshly ground coffee, it was freshly cut up, but
It's ground.
like fresh ground, fresh dirt. Yeah. So
Right.
yeah.
So I mean, if you changed it and you said, waiter, my coffee tastes like juice, and he said, well, you asked for fresh ground. I mean, then there's no humor in that.
Right.
Even though the punchline is the same,
Hmm.
but the setup was different, and the setup didn't introduce something that supported that alternate meaning. And because that alternate meaning is not supported, you don't have it.
So the kernel you would call the fresh ground. That would be the kernel.
Well, there's the two meanings: fresh ground meaning
Yeah.
ground up, and fresh ground meaning dirt.
Okay.
There's
Those
the
two
two
things would be the
meanings,
kernel. Yeah.
the sense and the nonsense.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and it can help to see, and then this goes also into humor quality, which is a degree of intensity. So when people experience humor, they experience it at different jokes at differing levels of intensity. And of course, if you're a humorist and you're trying to maximize the impact of the humor that you create, you want to create humor that is the highest quality, which means that the clash is something that is seen as the strongest. And there's a lot of different facets to that,
Hmm.
actually, each of which can be individually manipulated. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, and you'll see this too. You have the same joke and you ask 10 different people to tell it, and you can go through and say, okay, well, this person's version was the best version, was the funniest. Well, how can you say that something is funnier when it's the same joke? Well, then this gets into the performance aspects of it and
Hmm.
comic timing and other types of things. And that this kind of explains how, even though the kernel is the same, the surrounding context can make the perception of the kernel be changed.
Very mathematical. Um,
Yes, yeah.
who were like besides Charlie Chaplin? Who were some of the other great silent era comedians in film? Do you remember?
Marcel. So,
Wait, Buster Keaton is who I was thinking of. His wife
uh,
said he was very mathematical in what he did. That's how she described him in a documentary about him I saw a long time ago. Very mathematical.
it's really spectacular. And of course, his was physical comedy, and he also was a pioneer in the use of deadpan.
Yeah.
So deadpan is when funny things are happening, but you keep a straight face, and that is itself an ironic uh,
Hmm.
happenstance, and it is detectably humorous in addition to all of the other humor that's going on.
Hmm.
So, and this is actually, in fact, an extremely common thing where there's not just one humor kernel. There's actually a bunch of them, and they're all together.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like
Okay.
music. Music, you have notes, and then you have chords, and you have melodies, and you have harmonies, and these kinds of interactions have parallels in humor. And so the people who are generally considered the funniest, the comedians who star in comedy movies, they are creating a whole whirlwind of detectable humor kernels, and in ones that reinforce each other.
Or would it be like some Shakespeare? Some people are capable of a double entendre, but I think in Shakespeare he was such a craftsman at thinking and writing. I think sometimes there wouldn't be like a double meaning and some stuff he said. There'd be like a quadruple entendre or octuple entendre. So the kernel, different kernels would kind of be maybe like that too.
Right. The one guy who's dying, and Hamlet goes to him, and the guy says, "Ask for me tomorrow, you'll find me a grave man."
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Huh. I mean, little puns like that. And of course, some of them are bawdy and some of them are not. And yes, Shakespeare was a humorist, although that was not his primary thing. He was primarily a dramatic writer. Yeah. And even his comedies, were not laugh a minute. That's not their purpose.
Yeah. But cool. Well, I've been like brain dead. My brain's like I gotta struggle to keep it functioning for the last like half hour. So
okay. Well, and that's kind of how it works with this topic, because there's a whole lot to it.
It's not the topic; it's like the hour of night for me. So,
okay.
Yeah, like I was teaching a SAT class for a while, going like 7 to 8:30, and everyone in class was like the same, like brain dead. Sometimes, okay, you want to like go over a little bit and do this math problem? No, can we stop and do it tomorrow? I can't think.
Right.
So yeah, that's more like that.
We just want brains. We want brains.
Yeah. But any last words, Chris? Like summarize anything? Talk about the kernel or anything for folks?
Yeah, I think humor is really fascinating. You certainly don't have to know humor theory in order to find things funny, in order to be funny. But it helps a ton. It helps a lot to know the mechanics. Mm-hmm. And it's not, it helps you create humor, but it also helps you enjoy it more, because you have a deeper understanding of what's possible and what you're seeing. And so it contributes to enjoyment in that way. And yeah, humor is like a superpower. If you have it, okay, in education, to kind of sum up here, if you have the ability as a teacher to integrate appropriate humor into the lessons, well, that's just like that's a superpower. Now all of a sudden, all the kids know the stuff that much faster. They're paying attention.
Sure.
It communicates the information, so much faster. So yeah, definitely humor is a positive in a teaching environment. But it has to be, of course, appropriate. It can't be something that is distracting, detracting, or contradictory in some way. Mm-hmm. But okay, there's ways to judge that and know ahead of time whether or not it's going to be appropriate or not.
In the work and practice, just sure. Like in some things in strength training, people have learned from experience. Science didn't even know about it yet. I was listening to someone talk recently, a training expert, Pavel, I forget how to pronounce his last name, Savalin or something, from Russia, one of the ones introduced the kettlebell to the U.S., and he was saying that it's not really scientifically understood yet how we build muscle, how hypertrophy occurs. I guess so. But some things like that. So there's some things that they do in strength training that it works, but we just don't know why yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's certainly not knowing the mechanics of how humor works isn't a barrier to people. People have been super funny all along without knowing exactly why. And all right. But if you do know why, it just becomes that much easier.
Yeah. That's kind of the point.
All right, so the book is called Why Funny is Funny. I'm Chris Land. The companion book to it is called How to Make a Funnier You. It should be due out in 2021. So.
Cool. And we'll have some links to that for folks?
Probably, yeah. I don't have any right now because it's not published.
Right. But we'll be talking about this more in the future, hopefully.
Yeah. See what kinds of interest people have with it.
Dig into other aspects of humor. So cool.
Sure. You
Awesome.
do examples, whatever. I got examples all throughout the book,
Cool.
of all different kinds.
Cool.
So it is a very funny read, but it's not necessarily light reading.
Yeah. Yeah. True. Yeah.
It's funny, but it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a PhD thesis, really. So, but it's an accessible one. I mean, you can, as these kinds of things go, this is pretty accessible.
Cool.
But okay, if you want to go and make a funnier you, then you do need to put in at least some work with this. It's like if you want to be better as a musician or as a weightlifter or an athlete. Yes, you need to know the mechanics of what you're doing, but you also need to put in some work.
True.
Now, with how to make a funnier you, I'm really talking to things that are really, really easy to do, so that you kind of get started, no matter where you're starting from, really. It's advice for anyone, from people who are just beginning to people who are already in a humor career. How do you make things be funny? How do you make funny stuff reliably and quickly and easily? Okay, even if you are already starting off as very funny, I think that this perspectives in this book can help you.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Michael.
Appreciate it. So you have a good evening, and I'll talk to you soon.
Right, and I want to congratulate anyone who made it to the end of this podcast. I mean, that's spectacular. Wow. I mean,
yeah. Thank you, folks.
That is an accomplishment.
Applause to you.
Big applause to you. Wow.
But just got to be curious, man. That's all it is. Just be curious. Curious drives it.
Yes.
So, cool. All right. So thanks, Chris.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Have a good one.